Splatoon 2 starts you off easy by only tasking you to learn one competitive game mode, Turf War. Then at level 10 you unlock ranked battles, and in people's excitement to try the new feature, many never realize that you can read the rules of the game mode. They just dive in headfirst only to be very, very confused about what was going on. Now if you've played a shooter before, you may recognize Splat Zones as a sort of capture points or King of the Hill mode. You can even see the same neon outline indicating the territory you need to defend. Knowing this, you can probably work out the basics on the fly. Likewise, tower control is basically just a payload mode, like you might see in Overwatch or Team Fortress 2. You have a slow-moving structure that you need to stay near and protect from the opponent as it advances on a set path across the level. Rainmaker has a lot of similarities to Capture the Flag, where you have a more mobile objective that replaces your normal weapon while you're holding it and that you need to move across the map. So you can use a lot of strategies and knowledge from other shooters you may have played to get the hang of these modes pretty quickly. But then there's Clam Blitz. We should probably talk about Clam Blitz. Clam Blitz was added to Splatoon 2 in the version 2.1.0 update, so many players had already had a chance to figure out the other ranked modes before Clam Blitz was released. Anyone who had already played or gotten familiar with Splatoon 1 knew these game modes from their appearance in that game, so competitive players had already been theory crafting and figuring out how to play these ranked battles for years. By comparison, Clam Blitz was the Wild West for a little while, and most people will agree it's more complex than the other modes in addition to being newer and less familiar. Let's get into how it works. Unlike in other game modes, Clam Blitz maps give each team a clam basket painted their color, and the game starts with clams scattered all around the floor of the level. They'll also respawn in groups of 4 periodically as time goes on. Notice how when clams spawn on your color ink, they have a circle around them, which you can see through walls. That's an added advantage of painting the map in this mode. To score, you need to throw clams into your opponent's basket. Yes, your opponent's basket. You're not collecting the clams for yourself to eat them or anything. Notice how it highlights the basket you want to head for on screen. Before you can throw clams in the basket, though, you need to break the basket open. You'll notice that this inkling isn't scoring right now. When you run into a clam, you'll collect that clam and it'll follow along behind you. Be aware that your opponents can sometimes see these clams, so it's harder to be stealthy the more you have. Once you grab your 10th clam, all the clams you currently have will transform into a large football. It is this football, called a power clam, that can burrow into your opponent's basket and leave it open for you and your teammates to score on. Now you can throw single clams in and you'll see the score tick down. If one team's basket is broken, the other team's basket rises up and can't be broken until the open basket closes again. Everyone's attention turns to the open basket at this point. It's really rough to be about to score on your opponent right when they beat you to the punch and score on you. You could stay at their basket and try to counterattack as soon as it opens, like this inkling does here, if you have a numbers advantage. You need to realize, though, that now your basket is less defended, and everyone else on your team will be back protecting it, leaving you alone. Also, when you have a power clam, the opposing team can see where you are through walls. So in addition to being alone, you're visible to the enemy. Usually, returning to defend with your teammates is the safer choice. Let's look at a couple properties of the scoreboard. These are important because they influence the strategy we should use for the game mode. When the basket is open, you'll see that there's a timer ticking down. That timer lasts 10 seconds. When time runs out, the basket will rise back up, delay for 10 seconds, and need another power clam to reopen. You don't want to be too slow coming back to the basket with clams to throw in, because you'll be stuck with those clams in a vulnerable position while the enemy basket can't even be accessed yet. While 10 seconds isn't a long time to collect more clams and throw them in, you can reset the timer back another 3 seconds every time you throw a clam in. 10 seconds is the maximum, however. You can't throw a clam in with a full clock and make it last 13 seconds. You'll see here that throwing clams quickly like this only resets a tiny sliver of the timer. So if your opponents haven't found you and you're safe, it can actually be worth it to wait in between throwing clams, so that each clam is setting the timer further back and giving your teammates more time to come in with the mother load. You can see how much more of the timer is being reset now that we're waiting in between each throw, and your team can score more this way if you go unchallenged. A power clam is worth 20 points. You can see here that it will go from 80 to 60. Individual clams score 3 points each, so if you can manage to score at least 7 individual clams, you've actually scored more than a power clam is worth. Just realize that it's hard to score 7 clams one by one without your opponents spraying paint all over your face. When the basket closes, you'll notice that another number is added to the bottom of the scoreboard, here a plus 10. This number is a penalty. If you break the basket open again, you'll need to put in a number of points equal to that penalty before you score again. Here, this team had 59 left and they put 3 power clams in. That's worth 60 points. But because of the penalty, they didn't win the game. The closer you are to winning, the higher your penalty will be. Here you can see it's a plus 10, but after the score that blue team makes here, you'll see that it's a plus 30. So don't give up if your opponents just made a huge push. They'll need to get a lot of work done just before they can start scoring again. Scoring in Clam Blitz is pretty difficult to do. You need to push pretty far into your opponent's base, and if you have a power clam, the game gives away your location to all your opponents. Once the player with the power clam is splatted, there's a limited amount of time for a teammate to pick the clam up before it breaks, and all the work that went into making it is wasted. Remember that to score, you need to get a power clam in the first place. Even if your team scores a wipe, that is, they've splatted the entire enemy team like this Inkling has here, if nobody has any clams, there usually isn't enough time to run around the map and find enough to make a power clam before the enemy team respawns and is ready to defend. You need to have clams picked up already before you push for the fight. So in addition to painting important parts of the map, like you should be doing before fights break out anyway, every player should also make an effort to pick up any clams they can safely reach, so that if their team wins the fight, they're already poised to score. You won't always be able to score a full team wipe though, and that's when pushing gets more complicated. You can see here that the player at the bottom of the screen, the Tentabrella, has a power clam. Even though her team has an advantage having taken out the Inkbrush player, and even though she's using a weapon that gives her a big wall she can use to protect herself on the way toward the basket, the way the enemy team is grouped up to defend here, she can't safely move to try and score. One way to get past the opponent's defense is to avoid giving away your position with the power clam. You can keep yourself from getting a power clam until you get closer to the basket, at which point it's too late for them to close up their formation and stop you from scoring. There are a few ways to do this. You can push with most of the clams you need for a football and pick up the last 1 or 2 from near the basket. You can also juggle your last clam like so, making sure never to have all 10 in your possession at the same time. This technique also works to allow you to carry multiple power clams. This is usually more effort and risk than it's worth, since your opponents will freak out and collapse on you when they see 2 power clams heading to their basket at the same time. But if you somehow pull it off, you score 40 points by yourself, and it happens pretty quickly. You can also sneak a clam in if no one person is carrying all the clams. If you and another player on your team are still up after a fight, and you get to the basket and see that the number above their head shows that they almost have enough clams, all you need to do is press A to throw clams not at the basket, but at your teammate. You can also throw power clams to your teammates like this. If you have a clam and end up in a fight you know you'll lose, it might be the best choice to throw it backward, so your teammate can pick it up and save it. If you ever see someone with 7, 8, or 9 clams, it might be good to throw some clams at the ground next to them. You may not want to throw the clams directly at them, since they may have plans to be stealthy and pick up the last ones later. In that case, you'll surprise them with a power clam and reveal them to the enemy team against their will. But if you throw them on the ground, even if they decide against grabbing those clams, you can always pick them back up for yourself and save them for later. Always keep an eye on these 2 numbers on screen. These are the total number of clams each team is holding. If you need at least 10 clams to make a power clam, you probably want a few more than that, so you can follow up on the power clam and throw clams into the basket afterward. So you may not want to push until that number is around 15 or so. Also, if your opponent has a lot of clams, you need to be careful about leaving your basket unattended, because they can put in a lot of points if you slip up and let them through. One trick you can use that gets the clam to the base without giving much warning to your opponent is to use the super jump mechanic. You can always super jump to your teammates or to your spawn area by pressing X to pull up the map, selecting what you want to jump to, either with the D-pad or motion controls, and then pressing A. You can select your spawn to jump to by pressing down on the D-pad before you press A, but don't do that if you have a power clam, because any clams you're holding will immediately be destroyed on landing. If a teammate sneaks unseen into your opponent's base, you can take your power clam, super jump to them, and if you throw the clam as soon as you land, it's almost impossible to splat you before you throw it. If you see a power clam launch up into the air and you think your opponents are trying this, look around for where it's landing. You can maybe try timing a bomb explosion so that it splats them before they land. You can also use a splash wall to knock them away and throw off their aim. These can be unreliable though, since they depend on being aware that a super jump is happening, and they take careful aim and timing to pull off. The best way to defend against power clam jumps is just to prevent your opponents from sneaking in the first place. It's important to be mindful of what's going on around the map and in your peripheral vision when you're playing Clam Blitz. If you have a power clam and a teammate starts calling it this way over and over, they're probably in position under your opponent's basket and asking you to super jump to them. You usually need to react to this pretty quickly before their opportunity runs out and they get splatted. Most pushes in Clam Blitz start from just forcing your way into the opponent's base without using stealth. If your team can get a few splats and gain a numbers advantage, they can often press their advantage to get more splats and force the opponent back far enough to score. Look at how this poor Brella player has to contend with multiple splash walls, bubbles, a tent shield, and an ultra stamp. He has no hope of defending the basket from this position. Since layering specials like this can be so effective, we're going to cover a couple specials that are uniquely useful in Clam Blitz. Any special that's good for attacking closely grouped players can be good for clearing out the enemy basket long enough to get a power clam through. Any special that's good at targeting an individual player can be used to isolate a power clam holder and splat them. But some specials have extra utility that smart Clam Blitz players can take advantage of. Bubble blower bubbles can protect you from enemy fire before they're popped. So if you use bubbles near the basket, you can give the power clam holder something to hide in as they make their dangerous approach to the basket. The baller can be used to give your teammate a power clam jump without necessarily having to be quite as stealthy about it. If their whole team is watching the basket, it might get shredded. So try to get in position under the basket before they have the chance to focus you, if this is your plan. They might not actually want to shred the baller though. A lot of specials, especially ones like the baller that protect the user, cause you to drop any clams you're holding when they finish. Collecting the clams again is often too slow to get them in the basket before you're splatted. If a baller succeeds in getting under your basket with a power clam and you're not worried about other players jumping to it, wait until it explodes instead of shredding it. You have to act differently in this situation because if you do shred the baller, it will enable the player to throw the clam right away. Since the special never finished, they were never forced to drop it. This could give them a chance to score they might not have had otherwise. Because rolling in with a power clam gives you away and forces you to pick the clam back up again, it's usually best to just give your teammate your power clam before you try pushing with baller. Then you can baller under the basket and call for a jump like we talked about earlier. Splashdown is good for clearing out the area around the basket already, but it's especially tricky because you can splash down out of super jump. In Clam Blitz, if an opponent sees a power clam flying through the air about to land into the basket, they'll want to punish the landing, thinking a clam will be thrown there. And then you do this, and all of a sudden the basket is defenseless. To defend against this, make sure the method you're using to punish super jumps can be used from a safe distance, and be keeping track of your opponent's special meters at the top of the screen when you see someone on their team has a splashdown weapon, so you know when it's coming. They'll drop their clams when they jump, just like when using the baller, and so then you can splat them. Feeling better about giving Clam Blitz another shot? We hope so. Now go get yourself into B rank and unlock League mode, so you can coordinate your Clam Blitz pushes with your friends.
Double bubble, but I'm down. Nice.
For more tech tips and Splat Strats, follow Bravous and consider checking out our youth leagues where we teach the techniques and mindset needed to dig into Splatoon 2, Smash Ultimate, and other competitive esports.